Hey everybody! Wanted to make a video today talking about the gates. Now, it was at this point in my research that I was looking deeply into Greek sites and trying to spot hallmarks in the trapezoidal execution on the doors. I thought there might be some more connections there, and I started focusing more on the gates themselves. And when I saw this picture at Naxos, I stopped and I said, whoa, wait a minute, there's more going on with this gate than just trapezoidal elements or anything like that. Now, first of all, yes, this one is not trapezoidal, this is just square, but I find some things very interesting about this one. First of all, you see the nub and the square indentations. Now these, I'm not sure, no, we have to look at this site as a reconstructed site. This is not in the original configuration by any means. These lintels and flanking stones probably go together, but who knows about these bottom stones? The gap in the middle is very curious. If you look at my profile picture, you'll see that on the gate at Pumapunku, or I'm sorry, the gate at Machu Picchu has a similar cutout in the bottom. I've been trying to chase that hallmark, but I don't know if that goes anywhere. It's kind of spurious stuff because, like in this example, this looks to be maybe reconstructed or repaired. So I don't know how true this example is, but I do find some other things interesting about it. For example, here, now these look a lot like wedge holes, and when I say wedge holes, I mean holes that people would carve into a rock in order to split the rock into multiple pieces. Now, I have a whole nother album for just wedge holes, and you can see a few examples. Again, I haven't really made that album too detailed yet. It's a whole nother topic, and it'll be months and months of looking into more sites to flesh that whole album out. But for now, you can go in there and see some more examples that look similar to these. And in some instances, I'm going to say that maybe they're not wedge holes for splitting. Maybe it's a sign of processing. Specifically, the Menkaure pyramid casing stones at the bottom have some really strange holes in them, and some other Egyptian temples, some column capitals and other things. So check that out. You might find some of those interesting, and those might lead you in an interesting direction. But of course, we see the bevel blocks and the nubs, right? So a nub for lifting this block that you can pick up by hand. I don't see the necessity if that's for lifting. I find the processing, the surface processing, you see it's very smooth, and then you have areas of rough, like pitted pick mark surfaces. Interesting. I mean, you can see, look at this, a tiny little square indentation. That's an anomaly, isn't it? That's just strange. I don't know how to explain that. And then you go back up to here and you'll see another instance of a margin and a really pitted surface against the smooth edges. That's just really impressive to me. What kind of processing they could be using. It almost looks molded and like a concrete in a frame. Some of these are tightly fitted, but again, this probably is all reconstructed. Some of these have strange little bevels. Perhaps that's damage, but then little nubs on other little blocks, and of course the square indentations. So there's some really strange things about these sites, more than just, the surface level things that people notice. Now, I want to point out to you guys these nubs, or these are knobs. These are very large square knobs. Now, this one's broken off, and we'll look at the other side of the gate to see more. But I believe that this is a South American connection. And we'll see some other instances. I might have to do a quick Google search to find which site it is. The name escapes me, but I want to pay close attention to some of these features around the gates, right? Now, this may have been stepped incised a long, long time ago. This is probably the side that fell face up, and this is the more eroded side, but it probably had the stair-step faceted, incised motif around the gates. It has square indentations up here. I find that interesting. and bevel lines around it. So let's look at the other side of this real quick. Now, more knobs, yeah? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is strange, right? Because these bottom elements, these have the square indentations on the opposite sides. That's kind of interesting to me. These incised motifs are still in great shape. There, you see there's 3 of them. The top one has a little extra bit that kicks out. You know, it's more of a capital T shape, the top one is. But again, these 4 are definitely part of the arch, right? Part of the gate. These 2 maybe, but definitely these 4. And then look down here. These little blocks have little nubs on them. For lifting? Why? I mean, I'd say more for linking together with something, or a sign of processing, because you don't need a nub for lifting for a small block like that. I mean, that may even have a nub or a square indentation on it, I don't know. Very interesting weathering on this. I don't know what that's about. And then you see this little border detail that goes around. This may be original, so this may be somewhat of a original configuration, maybe a faithful restoration. You can see all the fill, of course, right, guys? But you see this nicely made border. I'm sure there's a artistic name for it. You just a quarter round piece, a mitered edge, beveled edge, you know, fancy architectural element. But we see these nubs and these knobs, and I wanted to compare these to some other sites and some other gates and see if we can find some connections today. I think there's going to be some interesting things we'll see by the end of this video. Okay, now we're in South America, and wanted to take a look at these 2 elements. These are not necessarily gates. I don't know what you want to call them. This one currently is a fountain, and this one currently is a ceremonial altar. These are both in South America, and I think are a really good connection for the Greek gates we just saw at Naxos. You see the knobs, the incised motifs, and there was a lot more to this structure before it was dynamited, so there could have been even more hallmarks. I think this might be a square nub. You know, just lots of interesting processing to these stones. So, you know, of course the Andean cross can be connected to this. And then at this site, it has the knobs too. They've been broken off, but you can see where they were. Has the same incised motif. You can tell that this channel is original, but was this originally a fountain? I don't know. This part down here does seem original, the way it connects. So I'm going to say it probably was a fountain. And if you look at Brian Forrester's video, there's some really interesting facts about this fountain. For example, if you run your finger across the corner of it, the water, instead of flowing over the edge, will dribble down the surface. And then when you run your finger back, it'll go back to pouring. I think if you do it fast, it'll pour, and if you do it slowly, it'll dribble. Just a perfect example of a masterpiece of hydrodynamics and hydromechanics. So just really, you know, sophisticated stuff. So there's a lot going on with the execution of these sites, not just, you know, picks and chisels and hammers. So we can go back to the list real quick and look at a gate at Tiwanaku, and again, I think this stepped motif is a hallmark. Especially at this example, you can see how it kicks out at the top and the bottom, and I think at this Naxos site it does the same thing. It kicks out at the top and down at the bottom. I find the fact that it has square indentations on both sides interesting. What that is about, I don't know. This is one piece of stone, just like the other gates at Pumapunku. Here you can see another anomalies. This is strange. Why are these 2 little cutouts in this stone. Was this originally supposed to go here? This may be all, reconstructed. There may be more to this that's missing now. Yeah, here's the famous example at Pumapunku, the Gate of the Sun. And you can see this was once one piece of stone. It has the incised motif. And something I find interesting about this gate, guys, that some people have not really pointed out, is this so-called, erosion or damage on this gate. Here, 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 and here. Those points are really interesting to me. I'm not sure what kind of forces could cause that kind of erosion or damage to the gate. Now, we have to assume that this side of the gate was face up and that portions of it were buried, so that likely this portion up here, the most eroded portion, was the portion that stuck out. But I cannot fathom what would cause the damage. It's symmetrical damage on both sides of the gate. I don't know what that's about. I think it's a sign of processing. I don't think, the only thing, maybe they could cause that damage picking the gate back up and repositioning it. I don't think so. But I find that really strange. It looks like processing or cataclysmic forces happened to this. I don't know. But I find it interesting. So we'll look at one more picture here, I think, and then, yeah, we'll go to some other pictures off the list. But here at Pumapunku again, you see an incised lintel. And this is obviously not in its original configuration because it was probably a lot taller. It's just been propped back up on some stones. But I believe these H blocks may have been the flanking stones for one of these gates. And they did go, some of them did go together. The incised, you could call those bevels around them, and then of course the little gate motifs inside of them. I think that's similar to like the Persepolis examples with the stair step with the little gate inside of them. Decorative, but also architectural and just a connected hallmark. It's the only way I can explain it. But there are other things going on, strange, weird processing marks, square holes and indentations. Just a lot going on at Pumapunku. A lot of connections can be made there. But we'll look at some other sites right now. A little more scattered across the world. But here, a Greek example, the tomb of Atreus, I believe is how it's pronounced. You can see again this incised motif. It's really subtle here, whether it's eroded or just because that's the execution. But you can see the stair-stepped incised motif, and this is trapezoidal slightly, but it's trapezoidal. And then it has a corbelled, arched opening above, the opening above the arch, like we talked about in the previous episodes of the bevel block series. That might be a hallmark. And you can see that in this execution, they're all smooth on the inside, so that might be connected to some South American sites we're going to look at. You can also see some square hole anomalies here, 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 here. Those are symmetrical, so those might have been for attaching things, architectural elements or decorative elements. And then you can also see other holes up here along the top, and then another row there. So what those are about, I don't know. And then of course the foliage, right? Who knows what's going on behind the foliage? So that's just an interesting aside. But definitely a connected site, I believe. It's dry laid stone, finely dressed, tightly fitted. Some large elements. There's blocks at the entrance to this farther out that are a lot bigger. So, and of course these lintel pieces are pretty big. So now we go back to South America, and we see that same upper execution like at that Greek example. It's a corbelled arch, but the inside has been smoothed. And in this example, a little cutout in the bottom, like a capital T shape. So that's interesting to me. Like the Naxos gate has the little cutout in the bottom, and like my profile picture of the Machu Picchu gate has a little cutout at the bottom. There may be something to that. Might follow that capital T shape. See where that takes us. The spiral motifs, those are interesting. Those are also an old world motif. So this is a very interesting site. Another similar site, stair-step motifs. And they almost look like pyramid underneath, smooth-sided pyramid underneath. Trapezoidal elements. And then look at this, and it's more of a curve, isn't it? It's more of a rounded arch. Same execution as that previous arch, just more rounded. Very interesting. I like that. That could be a separate connection, because most people will tell you that they only had the stair-stepped corbelled arch, but that example is clearly shows they had knowledge of the rounded arch. Very interesting. And this structure is actually, it's pretty well put together. It looks crude, but all these stones are very tightly fitted. So there was some knowledge involved, some at least legacy knowledge encoded into this structure. So again, here we see the cross, the Andean cross, with the stair-step motif again. It's like inside. You see that incorporated, the incised motifs can overlap. Sometimes there's a gate inside of a different shape, like a stair step with a gate inside. But those incised motifs are hallmarks, I believe. Here's a really cool example. You can see the capital T shape at Amaru Muru in South America, Peru. And above it, what most people don't realize is this is a capital T shape as well. It's like a frame for it, and it mirrors the shape of the foundation of Pumapunku. It's also a large square with a smaller extra element around one end, like a capital T shape. So there might be something to this capital T shape. You see doorways and windows at Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde that look exactly like these. So I believe there's some kind of connection throughout the southwest of North America and into South America with the capital T shape. And then of course here at Petra, or this is near Petra, you see the stair-step motif on the top. In other instances at Petra, they are actually free from the back of the bedrock, but they're still monolithic, they're still carved in to the bedrock. They are the stair-step motifs like we saw at the walls of Nineveh, and they create a facade motif along the top, like a coping. But in this execution, it's like a reverse of that, right? So that it forms almost a capital T shape. The recess does. And if you inverted this, it creates a complete Andean cross, right? So this stair step and cross and capital T shape, I believe that's a connection. That's sacred geometry. That's a hallmark of the original builders. This would be attributed to the Nabateans, these columns, these capital elements down here. But of course, they're also just classical elements like cornices. So, not sure about the attributions there. Could have been recarved. That's what Brian Forrester thinks. But even in older sites, like the Hittite sites, you see they look crude, but they've been heavily damaged. And there's more going on to these. You can see some of these stones are polygonal and fit together, and then you look at the wall, and it's actually pretty well fitted for what it is. And they're pretty large stones, and these flanking stones are pretty large. And in other instances of the Lion Gate, you see the header piece, and that's a large carved piece of stone. Not sure how that was done, when it was done, if that upper element with the two lions and the pillar in between, if that was a later filler addition into it, if it was a contemporaneous element to the original gate, and if it was it carved with those figurative elements at the same time it was built? Those are questions we haven't really asked, and we have to ask those questions with every site. When was the structure built? When was the art added to the site? When was the damage done to the site? We have to figure out, especially with the artistic elements, for attribution's sake, were these later carvings or were these original? And some of these Hittite examples, they look like original elements. Like this carved out here looks like an original element. And a lot of the artwork of the Hittites seem to be the same and mirror some of these. So it's interesting to think about some of the artwork and who it's attributed to. Again, here, this is a gateway at the walls of Nineveh, and you see the stair-step capitals, and how this one and this one form a corner. Kind of interesting, like we see at the Petra site. Now, there was probably more to this gate in the past, or maybe, I'm not even sure if this was supposed to be a gate, because you can see there's more to this on both sides, and if you Google search this, you can see excavation photos of this wall going down like 10, 15 feet into the ground, and then you see, of course, all this built on top of it. So who knows, right? Who knows? Other examples, like in France, you see the well-executed gates with their arches. Some of these, we have to, look at again and take a second look at and say, okay, well, some of those other examples are really crude. So what do we attribute the crudeness of the other sites and their execution? How do we reconcile that with some of this more, really high sophistication and, very delicately executed work? And how do they go together? And I don't really have an answer for that yet. My only proposal so far is the more crude structures were for cruder purposes, and these other structures were just for higher purposes. And they could be contemporaneous all at the same time, but there could be legacies of structures over time that incorporate the older architectural elements. And of course, in our current time, that's all we do is copy the older architectural elements. So the oldest and most faithful sites are still up for debate. Some of these, like especially these French sites, these may be more recent legacies of these older sites, but they're really fascinating to me. This one I hadn't even looked at when I was looking into French sites. And here, guys, I wanted to show you, this is that gate at Machu Picchu that I was talking about. That is my profile picture. When I saw this picture, I knew that there was a connection across the continents. It's undeniable. Now, in this scenario, there is a cutout at the bottom, like at that Naxos gate and that other Mayan example. There may be other examples of this also. It kind of creates a giant capital T shape. I'm not necessarily sure if it's the original intention and the original configuration, but it does seem like an interesting hallmark to at least to follow and see if it goes anywhere, like the capital T shape in and of itself with the Maru Muru site, and maybe even like the Göbekli Tepe stones are technically capital T shape, and there's other capital T shape stones in Sardinia, I believe, and some other places. So there may be something to that motif and that execution. I don't know what, but you can also see that these do indeed have bevels around them. This is another very rare instance in South America where you can actually see that the stones have a beveled edge all the way around the blocks. In most instances, they're just very smooth, finely dressed stones with no evidence of processing on the surface, but in a few instances, you can see where there's a little bit of the processing left. And this is also, obviously trapezoidal. Interesting elements here that, like I said, these may interlock, or there may be stones that overlap with these nubs and square holes and indentations. It's an interesting idea to think about. I'm not necessarily sure if that's always the case, but it's a possibility. And then here in Olympus, Turkey, you see a very similar gate, a trapezoidal style. You see the incised motif. In this instance, it's very highly decorated and highly, very elaborate, we'll say, with all this decoration around the edges and around the cornice and the side pieces. These may go into square holes, and that must be what's holding them in place. That's all I can assume. So if we see some square holes on either side of the gates in these areas, it could be for little elements like these little decorative elements that I'm sure have a traditional name. But there's other things about this wall and this site that go into the bevel block research, but I wanted to point this out as a separate anomaly. These blocks that have these little lips of material on them. In some instances, not in all instances, but in some areas that you just have these little molded, like almost like they were softened stones, right? You know, as crazy as that sounds, it seems like these are softened material on the lips of the blocks that have hardened and then broken away. So that is a rabbit hole in and of itself, and I believe I have a picture here that shows you a possible connection. Yeah, this is at Egypt. I believe this is the Menkaure Pyramid Temple. Yeah, Menkaure Pyramid Temple. This has a similar thing going on here. These blocks that appear to be molded and softened with these lips of material around the edges, and maybe nubs here that broke off. You know, I find that really interesting. It's only this little small section, and I believe another section on the opposite side. Yeah, and that's it. And then, let's see if I can get another picture of the backside. Yes, this is the back side of that gate at Olympus. You can see the square hole anomalies here. This was probably for the decorative lintel, and maybe there were other elements that went into them. But again, you see these like lipped stones and these huge flanking stones with maybe square anomalies down here at the bottom of them. So, very interesting things going on with some of these gates. And this all appears to be original. And then up here you can see a weird margin with the pick mark surface and then the smooth margins again. Very interesting. Very nicely done. Very ruinous though. A lot of it has fallen. And of course you can see the size. It's huge. And here is one of the newer additions to my site, or to my list, in Iran, the Arch of Augustus at Susa. Now, this one, I think I had seen before, and I passed it up because it didn't have bevel blocks, and that, again, was what I was searching for as the hallmark. But when I came across this picture, I remember stopping and pausing and saying, okay, what's going on with all these square holes? You know, these are not just for lifting because the upper courses don't have them, but these courses up here do. And some of these inscriptions, do these go around these square holes? And do they go into them or do they go around them? That's a very important distinction to make, right? When was this damage caused and when was this writing done? You know, and that's a very important thing to talk about when we look at Egyptian sites with the writing on their walls. If we start looking at their walls and see square hole anomalies in them, and we see that the hieroglyphics go around them, or if we see in some of the sarcophagi that there's damage to them and inscriptions have been made around damage, we may have to open up the possibility that the inscriptions were done much later. Like, for example, the Serapeum sarcophagus that has the scratched, inscribed facade motifs all over it that aren't very... some people say they're crudely done. I don't say they're very crudely done, but it's definitely inferior to some of the other executions of hieroglyphs we've seen, and especially that execution of stone in the Serapeum is of such a high sophistication that the inscriber must have been able to have done a better job than that. So there are scenarios where inscriptions have been added later, but there also may be possibilities of original elements. Like, for example, these decorative floral elements, this all appears to be original, right? This is all contemporaneous. These fluted columns elements, all original. I don't know what these square holes could be for venting the structure, for attaching statues and decorative things to the structure. I really don't know. It's strange that they are almost mirrored, right? On left and right, you'll see pairs and pairs that correspond. 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, and then, but down here it doesn't. And inside, I'm not sure. I can't really tell on the other side, but it appears haphazard as well. And have some of them been filled in? Don't know about that either, right? Some instances may have fill. Who knows? But these square holes, what's going on with them now? You know, we see examples like this, and this is not damage. This is not erosion. This is not just a lifting aid. What's going on with these? Okay, now we're back at Athens at the Acropolis, probably near that wall we were looking at in the bevel block episode. And this is a curious example because it appears like an original gate, an original configuration. We see anomalous stones though, bevel blocks and nubs down at the bottom, but we also see really crude elements of these walls mixed in with very highly, nicely dressed, finely done stones up here, and then some polygonal elements too. So this is a very strangely eroded wall. The bottom portions seem heavily eroded and haphazard compared to the top. The colors are different compared to the top. But this gate area does appear to be original, and perhaps it has been repaired and reconfigured over time around the gate because the gate was the most stable portion of the wall, and perhaps even the stairs were added later. But this gate, this lower portion, the threshold, appears really weathered. That looks original. The fitment up here looks original. So I have to assume that this gate is original. It has interesting square anomalies on either side of it for maybe a door, who knows, latches, who knows. It has the triple element along the top again, like we saw at the other sites. I think that might be a hallmark. But very interesting weathering on this site, and perhaps repaired elements around the bottom and reconfigured elements. I believe this stone has 2 large knobs on it. But yeah, very, very, very haphazard, but perhaps that's from damage and repair. But there are original elements here. Also notice trapezoidal. Just slightly, though. Just slightly trapezoidal. Aha. Here's an interesting example. This is in Spain. And you can see where it has been repaired, shored up with concrete. Modern times. But what's going on with all this old concrete above it, right? That's very strange to me. It is right on top of these blocks, and some of them look just crude and stacked together, but you zoom in and they're polygonal, small filler stones, and they have bevels. Here, clear, you can see bevel around this one. Some in here have bevels too. Not all of them. Some of them do. And this very weathered threshold, probably original. But what's going on with all this concrete, or whatever this is, along the top? Was this original to the wall? Or was this a repair effort, an ancient repair effort, or ancient addition? Which is very interesting to me. I think you probably see some examples of this in Egypt as well, where you'll see a gateway that's very ancient megalithic blocks, and then just some crazy fill on top to finish it off. And to whom we attribute that to and to when, that's up for debate. But that's just, it's very interesting material in the way and how thick it is, and just not sure. Very, very strange, right? And then here I wanted to go back to the site that I believe this is the Kailash temple, or one of the temples in India, where we can see the incised motif again steps in. At the bottom, it steps in, just like at the Greek example and the South American example. And I think the artwork is original in this scenario, right? It is carved from the bedrock, and it seems to have the same weathering and the same coloring as the rest of the stone. So I'm going to say that, these people were more than likely the original builders, whoever they were. And other iterations of these people may be seen in association with these motifs. They might not all look the same. They might be separate cultures, but they may also be connected through their knowledge and their architecture and through trade and everything else. They were a connected culture in terms of their civilization, but each area had its own, separate cultural flowering styles and their own burgeoning fashions and things like that. But the architectural hallmarks are repeating. And then here, I think this is another cave in India, one of the Ajanta caves, I believe. but again, you can see a stair-stepped motif around a shrine area, but this, who knows about if it was intended to be a shrine like this, but this all looks like it was carved at the same time, so perhaps, I believe some of these elements could have been added later. In other examples, the figurative statuary elements could have been added into these spaces later, but in some instances they do appear original. Brian Forster will say in some of the South American examples that the traditional view is that each little niche contained a statue, but there were some sites that had so many niches that there just couldn't be enough. Why have that many statues? So they may have had a different purpose. Some of these may have been intended to be shrine areas for these little figures. And then what does that say about the large ones that don't have figures in them? Are those meant to be sat in, just like we see here, for meditation, for spiritual reasons, whatever reasons? Who knows, right? But these gates, the false doors, the indentations, they're all very interesting to me, and I believe they're all connected through the architectural motifs. That's what combines them all. And then we'll end up here a few more sites. This one, again, we're back at Persepolis, and we see the incised motif again. This cornice piece at the top, this coping stone, this is like Egyptian examples and Greek examples. This has square hole anomalies in it, and in other gates around the site, there are other square hole anomalies and indentations and weird nubs and things going on with the blocks. It's amazing that they've stayed together. Many of them have probably been reconstructed and stood back up. And most of this has been repaired and rebuilt over time. This may be concrete, conglomerate rock, later additions. Could be original, who knows. Same with some of this terracing in the background. These look like big stones. Not sure who to attribute that to. We see these combinations of crudely executed but highly sophisticated as well, like in addition to more highly formal and highly executed elements. So it's hard to determine the timeline of some of these sites, who to attribute which elements to, but it seems like they were just as capable of doing simple things in crude ways, but that were effective, and then for the things that they wanted to execute extremely well, they could do that just as easily as well. So we'll move on to a couple other things on the list real quick I want to point out before we close up. Again, at this site at Naxos, we saw these square knobs, and that reminded me of something I had seen in Axum in Ethiopia, and how some of these openings have these square knobs on the corners, and now that they are stair-stepped and incised. I thought that was interesting. And then I noticed that in this example, it has a square cut out on either side of this doorway. Thought that was interesting. The fact that it has polygonal elements was interesting on this side. And then I looked closer in there, and there are bevel blocks in there. And these sarcophagi, we'll call them, have nubs on the side, and perhaps square indentations and square anomalies and things in this wall. Perhaps. Not sure on some of it, could be damaged, but in other instances maybe. But found that really interesting. I was like, okay, well, that appears to be some hallmark as well, the 4 knobbed corners. We saw that by the tombs of Darius at that tower that is half submerged in the ground that they have excavated. Each of the false windows has an identical motif of incised sides and squared corners. So that's interesting to me. And then here, another spot at Ethiopia, it might be the entrance to that tomb we just saw. We have the false door motif again, the incised stepped pattern with the squared ends, and then even the stair-stepped tops, like we saw at Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, and Greece. So what is this doing in Ethiopia, right? Also the way these fit together in this polygonal style. Tightly fitted, dry-laid stones. You know, when was this and by whom was this, right? Very, very interesting. But could it be a connected hallmark and a connected site? I don't know. But that's all from the list for the gates. And I think that's just about all I have to say about the gates. There's many more pictures we can look up. You can just Google ancient gates. That's, as a matter of fact, for this episode, that's kind of what I did. You can find other sites that may have some hallmarks to help me out. We can do a whole separate photo album if you want. But there's something going on with all the gates, connection-wise, motif-wise. We need to look into that further. Especially for example here, these little indentations here. See, they have the same little stair step above them, trapezoidal, right? This is supposedly later, as most people say, but you know, the motif may be older, and elements of this may be older. So who knows? One thing I do want to talk about, maybe in an upcoming episode, are these sites in South America that have temples that enshrine bedrock, like here at Machu Picchu and then here at Pisac. These two are really strange to me, and I cannot explain them. This one has a nub on it. Why does that have a nub on it? Astronomical reasons? That's the only thing I can... Ceremonial reasons? That's the only things I can think of. There is no reason for lifting this, but it is also a sign of processing, I think, because the nubs on other blocks seem to be created in the same fashion that this is created. So, why the worshipping of this bedrock and what it means, I don't know. And why they needed to enshrine it like this, I don't know. The gate for my profile picture, I believe, is this one here. And the hitching post of the sun, which I don't have a picture of, and here it is actually. This, I believe, also is a nub itself. I think they are processed in some way to create that shape, just like these cutouts are processed to create those shapes. So we're into high technology or high processing, sophisticated abilities here, because this isn't just carving out with picks and bronze chisels anymore. We're talking about something else at this point. We don't know what it is, but it's in configurations where it makes no sense, and it's in association with more traditional elements. Here again, 4 square knobs around the doorway or the gateway or the window. So what are these about? We also see these at some of the Lycian rock cut tombs. We'll see those later. I'll point those out. But what is this 4-post thing about, right? That's got to be a connected cultural hallmark. Why this is called a shrine. Why did they decide to enshrine a stair-step motif? And what is technically a corbelled arch? Natural, but I don't know. Refashion, I don't know how you even describe some of this stuff in South America. But we'll end it there. We've got a lot of other things to talk about. A lot more of the bevel block list to go through still. But we'll try to do some of these more tangent videos and go off into some rabbit holes and just open up discussion in the comments, because really there's no answers for some of this stuff, guys. We're going to have to figure it out ourselves if we want to know. So we'll just have to come up with the best hypotheses in the comments and see what sticks and what fits with the scientific data. And we'll just go from there, guys. So I appreciate you all hanging out with me again. Talk to you all later.